too rich to be a pirate. In the early 18th century, most pirates came from hard lives. Some were former sailors who had been beaten, underpaid, or abandoned by the navies and merchants they served. Some had spent years at sea with little food, little money, and almost no chance of rising above their station. For many of them, piracy was not a romantic adventure. It was a dangerous way out. Stede Bonnet was different. He was not poor. He was not a desperate sailor. He was not a man forced into crime by hunger or war. He was a wealthy landowner from Barbados, a man with property, status, and a comfortable place in colonial society. He had every reason to stay exactly where he was. But in 1717, Bonnet made one of the strangest decisions in pirate history. He bought a ship, armed it with cannons, hired a crew, and sailed away to become a pirate. The ship was a sloop, fast enough for raiding and escaping, and Bonnet gave it a name that sounded like it belonged to a hardened sea captain: Revenge. The name was dramatic. The plan was even stranger. Most pirate captains did not start by purchasing their own vessel like a gentleman buying a carriage. They captured ships, mutinied, or rose through violent crews. Bonnet entered the pirate world almost as if he were funding a private expedition. He had the ship. He had the guns. He had men under his command. What he did not have was the experience that usually kept a pirate captain alive. A pirate ship was not a polite drawing room. It was a floating argument, held together by fear, profit, discipline, and luck. The men aboard expected results. They expected prizes. They expected a captain who knew the sea and could make hard decisions quickly. Bonnet looked the part, but he had stepped into a world that did not care about his money or his manners. Still, at first, the strange experiment worked. The Revenge began attacking merchant vessels along the American coast and in the Caribbean. Bonnet and his crew took cargo, supplies, and whatever else they could use. His name started to appear among the pirates of the age, not because he was the greatest of them, but because he was so unusual. A rich planter had become a sea robber. That alone made people remember him. But piracy has a way of exposing weakness. Bonnet could command a ship on paper, but commanding pirates was another matter. His crew was rougher than he was, more experienced than he was, and probably more familiar with violence at sea than their captain. Every raid, every storm, every confrontation tested whether Bonnet truly belonged in the life he had chosen. During one violent encounter, Bonnet was badly wounded. The injury weakened him at the worst possible time. A captain who already struggled for authority now had to rely even more on others. And then he met the man who would change the course of his story. Blackbeard. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, was everything Bonnet was not. He understood fear. He understood reputation. He knew how to make an enemy surrender before the first cannon fired. His image alone could do work that other captains needed bloodshed to achieve. When Bonnet crossed paths with Blackbeard, the difference between the two men must have been obvious. Bonnet was the gentleman trying to become a pirate. Blackbeard was the pirate other men feared becoming trapped with. For a time, their stories became tied together. Bonnet's injury and weak command gave Blackbeard an opening, and Blackbeard effectively took control of Bonnet's ship and crew. Bonnet was not gone, but he was no longer the center of power on his own vessel. It is hard to imagine a worse humiliation for a man who had bought his way into piracy. He had purchased the ship, named it Revenge, gathered the men, and set out to remake himself. Then, in the presence of a stronger predator, he became secondary on his own deck. But Bonnet did not simply disappear. That is one of the reasons his story is interesting. He was not just a foolish rich man who played pirate for a few weeks and quit. He kept trying to return to the life, even when it had already damaged him. At one point, he accepted a royal pardon. For a brief moment, he had a way out. He could have left piracy behind, returned to a safer life, and survived as a strange footnote in the history of the Caribbean. Instead, he went back to sea. This time, he tried to reshape his identity. He used another name and attempted to separate himself from the shadow of Blackbeard. But changing a name does not erase the past, and by 1718 the authorities were closing in harder on pirates across the Atlantic world. The golden age of easy raiding was beginning to narrow. Governors, naval officers, and colonial courts were becoming less tolerant. The sea that had once seemed wide enough to vanish into was getting smaller. Bonnet's final chapter came near the Cape Fear River, in what is now North Carolina. His ship was cornered. A fight followed. The kind of fight where mud, shallow water, smoke, and panic mattered as much as courage. Bonnet and his men were trapped, and this time there was no clever escape, no powerful ally, and no second reinvention waiting beyond the horizon. He was captured and taken to Charleston. There, the gentleman pirate faced the law. In court, Bonnet tried to save himself. He argued, explained, and tried to shift blame. But the image of the confused gentleman could not erase the raids, the ships, the cargo, and the violence done under the black flag. The court did not treat him as a failed adventurer. It treated him as a pirate. In December 1718, Stede Bonnet was hanged. His career had lasted less than 2 years. He was not the most successful pirate of the Caribbean. He was not the most feared. He was not the most skilled. But his story survived because it feels different from the others. Most pirates were pushed toward the black flag by poverty, war, brutality, or desperation. Bonnet walked toward it from comfort. That is what makes him strange. He had a life many men would have fought to keep, and he traded it for a deck full of armed criminals, a hunted ship, and a rope at the end of the road. Maybe he wanted freedom. Maybe he wanted escape. Maybe he wanted to become someone more dangerous than the man he had been. The records do not give us a clean answer. What they do give us is a man who bought a ship called Revenge, sailed into a violent world he barely understood, crossed paths with Blackbeard, lost control of his own story, and still kept going until the law finally caught him. Stede Bonnet was too rich to be a pirate. But he became one anyway. And the sea did not forgive him.